School bullies don't know the new transfer is a brutal fighter. Love stories like this? Hit that subscribe button now, you don't want to miss what's coming next. At just 14, Nathan had already learned what fear tasted like. It was metallic, bitter, like the blood on his lip after every lesson from his stepfather, Greg. The incident that started this particular evening was so small, so insignificant, a fork slipping from Nathan's hand, clattering onto the kitchen floor. Before he could pick it up, Greg's voice thundered across the room, silencing the hum of the TV in the background. "Can't even hold a damn fork right, huh?" Greg sneered, his face flushed with rage. Nathan barely had time to respond before Greg yanked him by the arm and slammed the door to the kitchen. What followed was a symphony of pain, fists meeting flesh, muffled cries, and the dull thud of Nathan hitting the floor. On the other side of the door, his mother, Linda, sat frozen on the couch. She heard everything she always did, but she told herself it was for Nathan's own good. "Boys need to be tough," she whispered, a lie she'd repeated so many times it felt like the truth. After it was over, Nathan was forced to stand in front of Greg, his bruised hands trembling. "Shake my hand, boy. Make peace," Greg demanded, his voice steady, almost friendly now. Nathan hesitated, his gaze burning with resentment, but he obeyed. He always did. Life for Nathan was a cycle of violence and submission. At school, he carried that storm with him. The frustration, the helplessness, it all erupted the moment someone looked at him the wrong way. And when Nathan snapped, people got hurt. One day, in a fit of rage, he cornered his only friend, Jason, in the locker room. What started as an argument ended with Jason crumpled on the floor, blood dripping from his nose. The other kids just stood there, silent, terrified. Nathan's reputation had become a shadow that followed him everywhere. It wasn't long before the school principal decided he'd had enough. "Nathan, you're done here," Principal Roberts said, staring him down with cold, tired eyes. "Pack your things. You're expelled." Nathan didn't care. Or at least, that's what he told himself. But deep down, something cracked. For the first time, he wondered if Greg was right, if he was just a lost cause. After the expulsion, Nathan's life took an unexpected turn. "I've made arrangements for you," his mother, Linda, announced one evening as they sat in tense silence at the dinner table. She avoided his gaze, pushing a stack of papers toward him. "What's this?" Nathan asked, glancing at the bold letters at the top. "Haven Ridge Academy." "It's a boarding school," she said, her voice clipped but trembling. "It's your last chance, Nathan. You either make it work there, or I don't know what else to do with you." Linda's words cut deep, but Nathan didn't show it. He wasn't surprised. Her disappointment in him had become as constant as Greg's fists. She talked about the school like it was some magical cure for his anger, but Nathan knew better. Still, he agreed. What choice did he have? When the day came, Nathan stood in front of Haven Ridge's massive iron gates, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The school loomed before him, its gray stone buildings looking more like a prison than a place of learning. "Welcome to Haven Ridge," a cheerful voice greeted him. Nathan turned to see a boy his age with glasses perched on his nose and a wide grin. "I'm Alex. You must be the new guy." Nathan nodded, unsure how to respond. But Alex didn't seem to mind. He talked nonstop as they walked toward the dorms, pointing out the library, the cafeteria, and the hall where all the drama happens. Nathan's room was small but clean, with 2 twin beds. Alex plopped onto one of them, clearly claiming it as his own. "You're lucky, man. I'm the smartest guy here. Stick with me, and you'll pass every test," he joked, winking. For the first time in a long time, Nathan smiled. That night, as they headed to the dining hall, Alex continued his rapid-fire chatter, introducing Nathan to other students along the way. That's when Nathan met Jonah, a lanky kid with an air of caution about him. "Careful, man," Jonah whispered, glancing nervously around the room. "This place isn't as perfect as they make it seem. Your life here depends on one thing, where you stand in the hierarchy." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Hierarchy? Hierarchy?" Jonah nodded grimly. The rich kids run the place, and if you're not one of them, you're nothing. Trust me, you'll find out soon enough. Sure enough, dinner that night ended with an unspoken power play. Two boys at the far end of the table, Blake and Carter, called out another student, making him stand before everyone. The kid stammered, his face pale, as Blake ordered him to fetch a cup of water like some servant. They do this all the time, Alex whispered. Blake's dad basically owns the school. No one dares stand up to him. Nathan's jaw tightened. He hated bullies, but for now, he stayed silent, watching, calculating. As the meal ended, Nathan felt a pang of unease. Haven Ridge was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it was just another battlefield. Nathan barely had time to settle into Haven Ridge before the cracks in its polished image started to show. Blake and Carter, the self-proclaimed kings of the school, made it clear that new students had to earn their place. And by earn, they meant endure humiliation. It all started at breakfast. Nathan was quietly eating when Blake sauntered over, flanked by Carter and a couple of their lackeys. The cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew what was coming. "Welcome to Haven Ridge, newbie," Blake said, his voice dripping with fake friendliness. "You're part of the family now, but there's a little tradition you need to follow." Nathan stared at him, unimpressed. "Yeah? What's that?" Blake smirked, gesturing toward a pile of dirty plates stacked on the table. "Clean these up. Consider it your initiation." The entire cafeteria erupted into nervous whispers. Nathan glanced at the plates, then back at Blake. His gut twisted with rage, but he forced himself to stay calm. "No," Nathan said simply, his voice steady. Blake's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. "Excuse me? You heard me," Nathan said, standing up. "I'm not your servant." The room fell silent. Carter stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You don't get to say no, rookie. You do what we tell you, or you pay the price." Nathan leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Then I guess I'll pay it." The tension was electric. Blake's face twisted into an ugly grin. "Suit yourself," he said, walking away with a laugh. "But don't say we didn't warn you." That evening, Nathan returned to his dorm, only to find his belongings scattered across the floor. His textbooks were torn, his clothes smeared with dirt, and his mattress was gone. "Welcome to Haven Ridge," Alex muttered from his bed, looking uneasy. "You should have just done what they wanted." Nathan clenched his fists. "I'm not gonna bow to them." Alex sighed, lowering his voice. "Listen, man, you don't get it. Blake and Carter, they run this place. The teachers look the other way because their parents donate millions to the school. If you push back, they'll make your life hell." "I've been through worse," Nathan said, his voice cold. But deep down, even he felt the weight of their power. He didn't care about their money or status, but he knew these weren't just ordinary bullies. They thrived on control, and they weren't used to being challenged. The next day, the bullies struck again, this time targeting Jonah. As Nathan walked into the hallway, he saw Jonah pinned against a locker, Blake towering over him with a smug grin. "You know the rules, Jonah," Blake said, his voice casual. "When your roommate messes up, you pay the price." Jonah's face was pale. "I didn't do anything," he stammered. "Doesn't matter," Carter said, stepping forward. "Maybe you should have taught your friend some respect." Nathan froze. He wanted to intervene, but his feet felt like lead. Before he could act, Blake slammed Jonah into the locker, hard enough to make him gasp for air. "Apologize," Blake demanded, his voice sharp. Jonah looked at Nathan, his eyes pleading, but Nathan couldn't bring himself to speak. Guilt twisted in his stomach as he watched Jonah take the hit meant for him. That night, Nathan sat in silence, staring at the floor. Alex's words echoed in his head. "They'll make your life hell." But now, it wasn't just his life at stake. It was everyone around him. Nathan clenched his fists. He hated himself for staying quiet, but he also hated Blake and Carter even more. If they thought they could break him, they were dead wrong. Nathan had barely shaken off the guilt of what happened to Jonah When the bullies escalated their game, Blake and Carter were relentless, always circling like vultures, looking for the next weak spot to exploit. This time, they decided to go after Alex. It was lunchtime when it started. The cafeteria buzzed with chatter until Blake stood up, silencing the room with a simple wave of his hand. He pointed directly at Alex, who was sitting across from Nathan. "Hey, Einstein," Blake called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Come here." Alex froze, his tray trembling in his hands. Nathan shot him a look, silently warning him not to go, but Alex was too scared. He stood slowly, his legs shaking as he approached Blake's table. "Good boy," Blake said, grinning. "Now, tell me something, genius. Why does your roommate think he can ignore the rules?" Alex stammered. "I don't." Before he could finish, Carter grabbed the back of Alex's shirt, yanking him closer. "Wrong answer," Carter said. Nathan's blood boiled. He stood up, his chair screeching loudly against the floor. The entire cafeteria turned to watch. "Leave him alone," Nathan said, his voice loud and unwavering. Blake raised an eyebrow, amused. "And what are you going to do about it?" Nathan didn't back down. "Try me and find out." For a moment, the tension was unbearable. Then Blake smirked. "You're not worth the effort," he said, waving dismissively. "But don't worry, we'll see you tonight." Nathan knew exactly what that meant. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan and Alex found themselves walking toward the back of the school grounds. It was a place the students called the Pit, a barren clearing surrounded by trees where all fights were settled. Alex tried to convince Nathan not to go. "This is insane. They're going to bring their whole crew." Nathan shrugged. "They want a fight. They'll get one." Sure enough, when they arrived, Blake and Carter were waiting with 3 other boys standing behind them, arms crossed, their faces smug. Blake stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Still feeling brave, tough guy?" Nathan smirked. "You'll find out soon enough." What followed was chaos. Blake threw the first punch, but Nathan dodged it effortlessly. He moved like someone who'd been fighting his whole life because he had. Within seconds, one of Blake's friends was on the ground, groaning in pain. But the numbers were against Nathan. Carter grabbed him from behind, holding him in place as Blake delivered a brutal punch to his stomach. Nathan doubled over, gasping for air, but he didn't give up. He kicked backward, hitting Carter's shin, and broke free. The fight raged on, but Nathan knew he couldn't win alone. When he looked over his shoulder, Alex was frozen, too scared to move. "Run!" Nathan yelled. Instead, Alex picked up a rock and hurled it at Carter's head. It missed, but it was enough of a distraction for Nathan to get the upper hand. He tackled Blake to the ground, pinning him. "Call it off," Nathan growled. Blake struggled, his face red with fury. "You're dead," he spat. Nathan didn't flinch. "Next time you touch my friends, you'll wish you were." The other boys pulled Blake away, dragging him to his feet. "This isn't over," Blake hissed before they disappeared into the shadows. Nathan sat on the ground, catching his breath. Alex rushed over, his face pale but his eyes wide with admiration. How did you do that?" Nathan didn't answer. He just stared into the darkness where Blake had disappeared, knowing this wasn't the end. The day after the fight in the pit, the tension in Haven Ridge was so thick you could feel it in the air. Nathan knew Blake wouldn't let what happened slide, and sure enough, retaliation came swiftly. At breakfast, Nathan entered the dining hall only to be met with mocking laughter. Blake stood on a table in the center of the room, holding up a sheet of paper with crude drawings of Nathan surrounded by insults. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake called out, his voice theatrical, "may I present Nathan, the rat who thinks he's king." Nathan clenched his fists, but didn't react. He had learned long ago that anger could be a weapon, but only if wielded carefully. "Not gonna say anything?" Blake taunted, as Nathan sat down at his usual spot. "That's fine. We'll see if you're this quiet after your punishment." It wasn't long before the so-called punishment was handed down. That afternoon, during an assembly, Blake, acting in his role as student council president, publicly accused Nathan of violating school harmony. The mock trial was little more than a performance, with Blake playing judge, jury, and executioner. Nathan has consistently disobeyed the rules and challenged the authority of this council, Blake declared, pacing dramatically. The sentence? 1 month of detention. Digging a trench around the school, 1 meter deep. The room erupted in murmurs. Even some of Blake's followers seemed taken aback by the harshness of the punishment. "Are you serious?" Nathan said, standing up. Blake grinned. "Dead serious. You can start tonight." The work was grueling. By the time the sun had set, Nathan's hands were blistered, his muscles screaming from the effort of swinging the shovel. The other students had long gone to bed, leaving him alone in the moonlit yard. As he dug, a voice broke the silence. "You're working too hard. You'll wear yourself out." Nathan looked up to see Maria, one of the cafeteria workers, leaning against a tree. She smiled at him, her expression soft. "Why are you doing this? You could have just gone along with Blake, like everyone else." Nathan straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "I don't bow to bullies," he said simply. Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded. "My brother was like you," she said, her voice quieter now. "Stubborn, defiant. He didn't let anyone push him around either. But it came with a price." Nathan frowned. "What happened to him?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "That's a story for another time," she said, her tone turning light again. "Anyway, you remind me of him, that's all." Before Nathan could reply, Maria leaned in and kissed him softly, quickly, like she was stealing a moment. "Don't let them break you," she whispered before disappearing into the shadows. The next morning, the rumor started. Blake and his cronies had been watching. They saw Maria talking to Nathan, and by lunchtime, the whispers had reached the entire school. "Did you hear about Nathan and the cafeteria lady?" someone said as he passed by. "They're saying she's his girlfriend," another voice added with a snicker. Nathan ignored them, but deep down, he knew this was just another weapon for Blake to use, and use it he did. That evening, Blake barged into Nathan's dorm with a smug grin, holding a letter in his hand. "Found this in Maria's locker," he said, waving the paper. "Looks like you've been getting cozy with staff." Nathan's heart sank. "Give it back." Blake's grin widened. "Oh, I will, after I show it to the principal." The fallout was immediate. The next morning, Nathan was called to the principal's office. The air was heavy with judgment as the principal held up Maria's letter. "This is a serious breach of our rules," he said coldly. "You've left me no choice but to expel you." Nathan's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Fine," he said. "But I want the letter back. It's mine." The principal scoffed. "It's evidence. It stays here." As Nathan walked out, he wasn't thinking about his expulsion. He was thinking about Maria's words. "Don't let them break you." Blake thought he'd won. He thought he'd finally crushed Nathan's spirit. But he couldn't have been more wrong. Nathan wasn't broken. He was just getting started. Nathan's expulsion spread through Haven Ridge like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone knew the cafeteria worker Maria had been fired, and Nathan was no longer a student. The whispers filled the hallways, each version of the story more exaggerated than the last. Blake, of course, took full credit. He strutted through the school, grinning as his lackeys followed close behind. "Told you no one crosses me," he said to anyone who would listen. But Nathan wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Nathan stood outside the school gates, staring at the place that had become both a battlefield and a home. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. Blake might have gotten him expelled, but Nathan still had a card to play. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number he hadn't used in weeks. "Hey, Gunnar, it's Nathan," he said when the line connected. "I need your help." Gunnar, the sharp-eyed lawyer his mother had introduced him to months ago, didn't ask questions. "I'll be there in an hour," he replied. True to his word, Gunnar arrived, his sleek car kicking up dust as it pulled to a stop. Nathan explained everything: Blake's bullying, the mock trial, and how the school staff had turned a blind eye to everything. Gunner's expression grew colder with each word. "You were expelled over a relationship that wasn't even proven," Gunner said finally, his voice steady but laced with anger. "And they ignored everything else? I'll handle it." Nathan followed Gunner into the school, straight to the principal's office. The room was dimly lit, filled with the faint clink of glasses as the principal and a few teachers sat enjoying their evening drinks. They froze when Gunner walked in, his presence commanding the room. The principal stood, attempting a smile. "Mr. Gunner, this is unexpected." "It won't take long," Gunner interrupted, his tone sharp. "Nathan deserves a fair hearing. And if he doesn't get one, I'll make sure every parent and board member knows what's really happening at Haven Ridge: bullying, abuse of power, and blatant favoritism." The room went silent. The teachers exchanged nervous glances. The principal's confidence crumbled. After a long pause, he sighed heavily and reached into his desk drawer, pulling out Maria's letter. "Fine. The expulsion is reversed," he said, his voice tight with resentment. "And as of tomorrow, the student council is disbanded. Blake and his followers will lose their positions." Nathan didn't smile, even as relief washed over him. "Thank you," he said quietly. As they left the office, Gunner clapped Nathan on the shoulder. "You've got your second chance. Don't waste it." Nathan nodded, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. Blake had lost his power, but Nathan knew he wasn't the type to let things go. The next day, as Nathan walked through the halls, he felt the weight of every gaze on him. Some students looked at him with awe, others with fear. Blake, however, glared at him from across the cafeteria, his jaw tight with rage. Nathan sat down at his usual table, ignoring the stares. He knew this wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had the upper hand. Nathan's return to Haven Ridge wasn't the triumphant victory he had hoped for. The scars left by Blake's reign lingered in every corner of the school. While the disbanding of the student council meant Blake had lost his official power, his influence over the other students hadn't disappeared. If anything, the humiliation of being dethroned had only made him more dangerous. Nathan could feel the tension building, like the calm before a storm. Blake didn't hide his hatred. Every glare, every muttered insult, every passive-aggressive shove in the hallway was a warning. But Nathan didn't flinch. His focus remained on one thing: graduation. For the first time in his life, Nathan wanted something more than just survival. He wanted to prove to his mother, to himself, that he could finish what he started. But home was no escape. When Nathan returned for winter break, he found himself back in Greg's suffocating presence. The bruises on his knuckles from the fights at school hadn't even faded before Greg demanded answers. "So, expelled again, huh?" Greg sneered as they sat around the dinner table. His mother, Linda, tried to intervene, but her voice was weak, barely cutting through Greg's accusations. Nathan set his fork down carefully. "I'm back at school," he said evenly, refusing to let Greg's taunts get under his skin. "And whose fault is it you got kicked out in the first place?" Greg shot back. "You think you're so tough, taking on people who are better than you? Better than me?" Nathan's voice rose slightly, but he caught himself, taking a deep breath. "They're not better. They're just louder." Greg's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "You think you can talk back to me now, huh? Maybe you've forgotten what happens when you disrespect me." Linda winced, her gaze dropping to her plate. This time, though, Nathan didn't back down. As Greg reached for his belt, Nathan stood, his voice steady. "Don't." Greg froze, startled by the defiance in Nathan's eyes. "This is the last time," Nathan said firmly, his hands clenched but controlled. "I won't let you touch me again. You don't get to use fear to keep everyone in line." Greg laughed bitterly, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression. "You think you can stop me?" "Yes," Nathan replied simply. The room went silent. For the first time, Greg didn't move. Instead, he glared at Nathan, muttered something under his breath, and left the room. Nathan sat down slowly, his heart pounding. Linda looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Nathan, don't," he said softly. "It's done." When winter break ended, Nathan returned to Haven Ridge with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for every moment he'd been made to feel powerless at home, at school, everywhere. Blake wasn't done with him, of course. During a particularly cold January morning, Nathan woke to find his room had been trashed again. Mud and water covered his bed, his books were ruined, and Alex looked at him with wide, helpless eyes. "You can't let him win," Alex whispered. Nathan didn't respond. He didn't need to. As he cleaned up the mess, he started planning. It was time to end this for good. Nathan had reached his breaking point. Blake's latest stunt wasn't just another prank. It was a declaration of war. Nathan knew there was only one way to end it completely and decisively. That morning, as the frost clung to the windows, Nathan strode into the dining hall with a calmness that was almost unsettling. The usual chatter died down as students noticed him walking straight toward Blake, who sat at his usual table surrounded by his lackeys. Blake smirked as Nathan approached, already preparing a sarcastic remark. But before he could speak, Nathan slammed a hand on the table, his voice cutting through the silence. "Enough," Nathan said, his tone low but firm. "You and me. No tricks, no backup, just us." Blake leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. "And what happens when I win?" Nathan didn't flinch. "If you win, I'm gone for good. But if I win, you leave everyone alone. No more bullying. No more games. You stay out of my way." The room erupted in whispers. Even Blake's followers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't part of their usual routine, and they weren't sure Blake could handle Nathan one-on-one. Blake's smirk faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "Fine," he said, standing up. "Tonight. The pit." When the time came, nearly the entire school had gathered at the pit, their breath visible in the icy night air. The tension was palpable as Nathan and Blake faced off under the dim glow of flashlights. Blake struck first, lunging at Nathan with all the fury of someone desperate to reclaim their pride. But Nathan was ready. He dodged, his movements sharp and precise, years of experience etched into every step. For every punch Blake threw, Nathan had a counter. And with each hit Blake took, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. The once invincible Blake was unraveling, his confidence crumbling with every failed attack. Finally, Nathan delivered a devastating blow that sent Blake to the ground. For a moment, everything was silent, except for Blake's labored breathing. Nathan knelt down beside him, his voice steady but cold. "It's over, Blake. You're done." Blake looked up, his face twisted with a mix of rage and humiliation. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. Nathan stood, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "It changes everything," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We don't have to put up with this anymore. Not from him. Not from anyone." The students stared at Nathan, their expressions shifting from fear to something else hope. The next day, Blake was nowhere to be seen. Word spread quickly that he'd packed his things and left Haven Ridge. His reign of terror was finally over. Nathan's life didn't magically become perfect after that. But something had shifted. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. Graduation came faster than Nathan expected. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he spotted his mother in the audience, clapping with tears in her eyes. She looked proud in a way Nathan hadn't seen before. After the ceremony, Linda hugged him tightly. "You did it," she whispered. Nathan smiled. "We did it." When they returned home, Greg tried to reassert his dominance, but Nathan stood his ground. This time, Greg was the one who backed down, eventually leaving for good. Months later, as Nathan packed his things for college, he found a letter tucked under his pillow. It was from Alex. "You changed everything," it read. "Haven Ridge is a better place because of you. Don't stop fighting for what's right." Nathan folded the letter carefully, placing it in his bag. As he looked out the window, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. He wasn't just the kid who fought back anymore. He was the kid who won.